we are talking about back to basics. There's a lot of emphasis on your wedding day and making sure it's right. But I think a lot of people, and I've spoken to a lot of couples that have done this actually, get so overwhelmed with the wedding planning process, they actually don't know where to start. I had one bride who had left it such a long time. She'd intended on planning her wedding, and it was like 6 months after she'd intended on starting that she was still like not planning. And when I spoke to her about it, she came to me for some help. When I spoke to her about it, she was just really overwhelmed with it all, and actually didn't know where to start because there was so much information. And she was one of the brides that turned to the internet for help. DIY wedding, wanted to do it all herself, which is brilliant. But just there was so much literature out there, so much information, she just didn't know where to start. So I kind of helped her put a plan of action into place and kickstart it from there. And I think it's really important that you get the basics right when you're starting wedding planning. Just because it kind of sets the tone, you know, it lays the foundations, it sets the boundaries, and it helps. It's the same as any project, right? You have to look at your wedding planning as a project. And any project that you're going to embark on, you need to make sure that you lay down your groundwork, you know where you're going to start, you know your plan of action, you know sort of where you want to end up, what you want to achieve. So that's really important, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So we'll talk about the very basics, so how you should start with your wedding planning. But what I wanted to touch on first was the announcement that was made this week about postponing weddings. Should you postpone? It's such a difficult conversation to have, especially for people in the wedding industry, because, you know, we've got a lot of brides and grooms messaging us at the moment, you know, should we postpone? What should we do? I think the answer to this is very much only one that you can answer. Is your head going to overrule your heart? Is your heart going to overrule your head? And there's a lot to take into account, okay? So it's not just the financial element of, you know, should we postpone? My opinion on it is you need to check with your suppliers in the first instance what the repercussions are of changing your date. And God forbid, should you need to change your date again, what happens at that point, okay? Because what you don't want to do is get to, let's just say you've postponed for 12 months, okay? You've postponed for 12 months. What happens if when you get to that, you know, that next 12 months that you need to postpone again? Okay. Hopefully you won't. And that is the plan. I have faith. That is the plan. But what if you did need to do that again? Okay. So you need to sort of do your homework and find out where you're going to stand in 12 months time. God forbid, should that happen again. Okay. So once you've got that kind of official logistical side of it, I think then it's down to you to decide. So if it's super, super important that you have your 150 guests, for argument's sake, or even 60 or 100, like whatever your numbers are, if that is the most important thing to you for your wedding day, then my opinion is, yes, you should postpone. If you are quite/more than happy to go ahead with the 15, just obviously bearing in mind the staffing levels within that number as well. If you are happy with that, then go for it, okay? You can always have another big party next year or the year after. It doesn't matter, okay? Like I said, it's what's important to you as to how you make this decision. But one important element to take into account here is you've done the hardest job, okay? You've gotten engaged. You've decided to commit to each other as a couple for the rest of your lives, okay? So when you weigh up whether we get married this year or whether we get married in another 2 years' time, then it might help you kind of make that decision. You're going to get married regardless. You know that fact. It's just when. And if you can sort of understand that delaying your wedding day isn't the end of the world. Yes, it's really important, but it's not the end of the world. Then maybe it will make it a little bit easier to actually say, do you know what? Yeah, we will postpone for a couple of years or 12 months or 6 months, whatever it may be. If what you're going through now is really stressing you out and it's really having a detrimental effect to your health and your mental health, my personal opinion is postpone. Do you want to be going through that emotion and those feelings between now and the time that you get married? Probably not. So in my opinion, postpone. I think it's the most sensible choice, but like I said, it's individual. You've got to do what's important to you. Okay, I hope that helps, but if you've got any questions, let me know. So back to basics, wedding planning. I'm going to talk through some steps with you and help you go back to basics. Where do you start? Okay, so let's put that horrible coronavirus to one side, okay? And this will still apply if you do plan on planning your wedding during the coronavirus. It will help you. It will help you set the groundwork, lay the foundations, and build up from there, okay? So where do you start initially? Okay, so the first thing that you should do is set a budget and prioritise which elements of your budget are important, okay? You cannot plan a wedding unless you know what your budget is. So if you need to have that awkward conversation with family members about how much they intend or plan on assisting you with, now's the time to have the conversation. And trust me, they wouldn't have told you that they've got some money set aside for you if they weren't expecting that conversation. So it's one worth having, whether you do it... my personal opinion is you should do it in a nice way. So invite them over for dinner, and just explain to them the process that you're going through your budget, you're going through your wedding planning, and it would be really helpful. You really appreciate their help, but you'd really love their cooperation in terms of letting you know what they intend on helping you with, so that you can plan your budget and you know what to take into account. What you don't want to do is plan your wedding and then halfway through find out that they were planning on donating X amount of money to you, because that could have completely changed your direction when you were planning. So that's the first thing you need to do, is set your budget and prioritise what you're going to spend and where. So for example, entertainment generally comes pretty low on people's wedding planning guidelines. So and I don't mean sort of DJ or music in the evening. It's more kind of additional entertainment on top of that, okay? But for some people, that's the most important thing, or one of the most important things for their wedding, okay? So just make sure you prioritise, how you're going to split your budget and what element is going to go to which part of the day. And whether you're prepared to sacrifice an element of one part of the budget to pay for something else that may be sort of a little bit more expensive than what you were expecting. Number 2 is to discuss your numbers. So when you look on the internet, there's a lot of guidelines and a lot of support around which order you should do your back to basics. And again, it's down to you. These are just my opinions. Entirely up to you if you want to follow them or not. You do what feels right for you. But I would then discuss your numbers, okay? Because let's say you go venue shopping and you fall in love with a venue that can't accommodate the numbers that you want. And I've seen this happen before, and I've had people in tears because they just can't cut their guest list by that much, okay? So I would discuss your numbers, and I would say it needs to be pretty accurate, okay? And let's just say you do book your wedding with 18 months notice. A lot can happen in that time. You may lose friends, you may gain friends, but as long as you're as pretty accurate as you can be for that period of at that period that you're doing it, it will help you narrow down the venues, because this is a tough job that you've got ahead of you. Wedding planning isn't easy. there's a lot to take into account. So what you don't want to do is go and see all of these venues and then find out that they're not within your numbers, your capabilities. Okay. If you're planning on having an intimate wedding at the moment with the coronavirus, and you plan on getting married in the next 6 months because that's your thing and that's what you want to do, you probably don't need to worry so much. But again, there will be guidelines in place for corona weddings, so it's worth checking that out with the venue. So number 2, make sure you discuss your numbers. And you're doing this as a team, obviously. Again, as partners, you need to decide if you're going to have an equal 50-50 split, or if, you know, one of you is going to have more, one of you might have more members of the family than the other one. So, you know, does that take precedence? You know, you need to discuss this and make sure that you agree on it. Number 3 is your venue. So I would then go looking for your venue, because you know your numbers, you know what your budget is, and then that's when you can start looking at your wedding venue. Okay, so a good resource that I find really helpful is Hitched. You can input in there what you're looking for, and it will give you a good guideline as to what it can accommodate you for, and also it helps with your theme. So again, when you research planning your wedding, a lot of places will tell you to sort out your theme before your venue. I'm fairly split on this, but I think you should go looking for the venue first, because, and again, this has happened before, the amount of couples that have come to a venue that I've worked at and actually didn't want that style of venue. They had it in their head that they were going for this brandly new converted barn, and, you know, their partners taken them along to this Georgian manor house, and they've completely fallen in love with it, but they've already set their theme. They've already started buying things for that theme, and then they've fallen for something completely different. And then that's when you're left with all of these items that you've bought for this barn venue that you were going to choose, and then you fall in love with something else. So my personal opinion is that you should choose your venue before you choose your theme, for that exact reason. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. You just don't want to be in a position where you fall in love with a completely different venue. That takes me on to sort of how you find your venue. So we're still on point 3, but just sort of 3.1. How do you choose your venue, right? It's difficult. My opinion is you should look at a handful of venues. And again, the amount of couples that have been to see like 20, wow. I would go and see 5 or 6 venues, and I would also make sure that they are all very, very different types of venues, because what you think in your head you might like, you might not actually like on the day that you go and see it. The practicalities of it, there are a lot of restrictions based on the type of venue that you're going to go for. So you need to bear that in mind. And there's also guides that you can get online about different types of venues and the different types of questions you should ask. There's different restrictions in different types of venues. So in your head, if you think that you want to go for a newly converted barn, for example, and then you go along and they've got certain types of restrictions, let's just say fireworks. Let's just say fireworks are really important to you, but you can't have them at this venue because it's a working farm, for example, and it will scare the animals, then that can be really disruptive. So my opinion would be, even though you are dead set about which type of venue you want to go and see, make sure you go and see a variety of different venues, because you never know. And personally, I would rather do that and get to the end of seeing those venues and go, do you know what? I definitely want a London venue, for example. It's peace of mind for you, so you know in your mind, that's the venue I wanted, that's the venue I fell in love with, and now I'm 100% certain that that's the venue I'm going to go for. Okay, that all ties into point 3 about your venue and your theme. So again, like I said, in my opinion, go for your venue before your theme. Number 4 is your suppliers. Okay, once you've got your venue and you've got your date sorted, you can then look at your suppliers. Now, point 4 ties into number 1, where we were talking about your budget and we were talking about entertainment, etc. So at this point, you can choose your suppliers. You've got your date, you've put your deposit down, you can now start booking your suppliers. what I would just put a point in here, if there's a certain supplier that you definitely want on your wedding day, you might want to check with them before you put your deposit down or before you start looking or setting a date. It's only happened a couple of times, but I do know a couple of couples who have actually moved their wedding date because the particular photographer that they wanted for their wedding wasn't available. So again, when you're setting your budget and you're prioritising what you want to spend your money on, and one of those things is a certain supplier, maybe check with them the date. Not a lot of suppliers will actually hold a provisional date for you, just because obviously the wedding industry is so busy, usually so busy. They can't hold a date because there's, we're doing quotations left, right and centre for dates. So it's quite difficult for us to hold provisional dates for you. So I would certainly check that. Okay, but if you've got suppliers in mind, now's the time to be talking to them after you've booked your venue. Okay, so you then set that in stone. The final thing that you should organise in your back to basics when you initially start planning your wedding is your insurance. Okay, and I think coronavirus has really taught us that is super important. Whilst I know there are people having a lot of difficulties with insurance at the moment, you should still have it. You do not want to be faced with any type of situation that could come across when you're planning your wedding. So if you're getting married in the winter, you've got the weather to contend with, and I know there's sort of acts of God restrictions in place in insurances, but you should 100% have insurance, no matter how big or small your wedding's going to be. It's really, really, really important. If anyone's got any questions, let me know. I can answer them for you about anything that we've gone through or anything that you're struggling with your wedding planning journey. Okay, so I'm going to summarise. Back to basics summary. Okay, so back to basics, 5 tips to help you plan your wedding from the start. Okay, number 1. Set your budget and prioritise. Okay, so sit down, work out what your budget is and work out where your priorities are going to lie within that budget. What do you want to spend on what element of the day? Number 2, discuss your numbers. So make sure you've got your numbers set in stone. Not stone, they are going to change, but you've got a rough guide of what your numbers are so that when you go on to point number 3, which is your venue, you know what numbers you're playing with. For me, your venue and your theme come as one.